Have you ever been judged by your appearance, treated like you were worthless because of what you wore, because of where you came from? Have you ever felt that burning sensation in your chest when someone looks at you with disgust, as if you didn't deserve to breathe the same air as them? Well, let me tell you something that happened to me, something that changed my entire life, something that transformed me from a young person with worn shoes into someone who would own the very institution that tried to humiliate me. This is my story. And I'm sharing it with you today because I want you to understand that sometimes the people who laugh at you, who underestimate you, who treat you like dirt beneath their feet, they're actually giving you the greatest gift of all, motivation. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what matters is what I felt, what I experienced, and how I rose from the ashes of humiliation to become someone who would make those mockers regret every single word they said to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember it so clearly that it feels like it happened yesterday, even though years have passed since that fateful day. I was 23 years old, wearing my only pair of dress shoes, shoes that I had worn to every important meeting, every job interview, every moment when I needed to present myself as someone worthy of respect. Those shoes had holes in the soles. The leather was cracked and peeling. The laces were frayed and knotted in multiple places where they had broken, and I had tied them back together. But they were clean. I had polished them that morning until they shined as much as old, damaged leather could shine because I had an important appointment at First National Bank downtown. I needed to open a business account. I had saved every penny from 3 part-time jobs, working 18-hour days, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night, eating instant noodles and day-old bread from the discount bakery section. I had exactly $3,000, $3,000 that felt like $3 million to me, because I had bled for every single cent of that money. I had scrubbed floors, delivered newspapers in the freezing cold at 4 in the morning, worked the graveyard shift at a gas station where I was robbed twice at gunpoint. Every dollar in that worn envelope in my jacket pocket represented a sacrifice, a moment of my youth that I had traded for a dream of starting my own business, a small tech consulting firm that I was convinced would succeed, because I had the knowledge, the skills, and most importantly, the hunger that only someone who has truly struggled can understand. As I walked into that bank, my heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I was so nervous that my hands were shaking slightly, leaving small sweat marks on the envelope I clutched tightly. The bank was magnificent, all marble floors and polished brass fixtures, crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling, leather chairs in the waiting area that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. I felt so small in that space, so insignificant, but I held my head high because I knew that my $3,000 was legitimate, earned through honest work, and I had every right to be there, every right to open an account and start my journey towards success. I approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost as much as my rent for 6 months sat filing her nails with an expression of complete boredom. When I cleared my throat softly to get her attention, she looked up at me with those cold blue eyes that traveled from my face down to my worn jacket, my clean but old shirt, my carefully pressed but obviously secondhand pants, and finally settling on my shoes. Those cursed shoes that I had tried so hard to make presentable, those shoes that carried me through every struggle, every challenge, every step toward my dreams. Her expression changed from boredom to something else, something that made my stomach twist with a feeling I knew all too well. Contempt. Pure, undisguised contempt. The kind of look that says you don't belong here. You're not one of us. You should leave before you contaminate our pristine environment with your poverty. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at my shoes with a little smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly glossed lips. And then she called out, loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear, loud enough to make sure I understood that this was intentional, that this was meant to humiliate me. Marcus, come look at this, she said, her voice dripping with amusement, with cruelty, with the casual sadism of someone who has never struggled, never known what it's like to choose between eating lunch or saving that money for something important. A tall man in an expensive navy suit emerged from one of the offices, his shoes clicking importantly on the marble floor, each step announcing his superiority, his position, his power in this temple of finance. Marcus was probably in his mid-30s with slicked back hair and a tie that probably cost more than my entire month's groceries, and he had that look That look that bankers who have forgotten where they came from often have. That look of entitlement and superiority that makes them think they're better than everyone else, simply because they work with money, as if handling other people's wealth somehow made them wealthy in spirit, somehow made them more valuable as human beings. "What is it, Jennifer?" he asked, already smiling because he could sense the entertainment coming. He could smell the opportunity to feel superior to someone, to remind himself that he was successful and important and better than the poor person standing at the reception desk. Jennifer pointed at me, actually pointed like I was an object, an exhibit, something to be observed and mocked rather than a human being with feelings and dreams and dignity. "Look at his shoes," she said, barely containing her laughter, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth in a gesture of fake shock, fake concern, that was really just a thin veil over her genuine delight at having found someone to ridicule. Marcus looked down at my shoes and I watched his face transform, watched the professional mask slip away to reveal the small, petty person underneath, the person who needed to feel superior to others to feel good about himself. He laughed, actually laughed, a sound that echoed through the marble lobby, bouncing off the walls, filling my ears, burning itself into my memory where it would stay forever, fueling something dark and determined that was beginning to grow in my chest. The laughter continued and I stood there frozen, feeling my face burn with shame, with anger, with a humiliation so profound that it felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with an icy hand. Other bank employees began to notice the commotion, heads turning, curious faces appearing from offices and cubicles, drawn by the sound of mockery like sharks drawn to blood in the water. An older gentleman in the waiting area looked uncomfortable, shifting in his leather chair, but he said nothing, just looked away quickly when I glanced in his direction, choosing the comfort of non-involvement over the discomfort of standing up for what was right. Marcus finally composed himself, wiping imaginary tears from his eyes in an exaggerated gesture of amusement, as if my shoes were the funniest thing he had seen in years, as if my poverty was entertainment designed specifically for his pleasure. "Sir," he said, drawing out the word in a way that made it clear he was using it sarcastically, that he didn't really consider me worthy of that respectful title. "I'm not sure you understand the kind of establishment this is. First National Bank serves clients of a certain caliber. We have standards here, dress codes, expectations of professionalism." His eyes traveled over me again, lingering on every worn item of clothing, every sign of my financial struggle, cataloging my inadequacies with the precision of someone who enjoyed finding fault in others. "Perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of the community banks or maybe a check cashing place. I believe there's one about 3 blocks from here. They're quite used to dealing with people in your situation." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with precision, designed to hurt, designed to make me feel small, designed to send me away with my tail between my legs, accepting my place in the hierarchy that people like Marcus had constructed to make themselves feel important. Jennifer giggled again, actually giggled like a schoolgirl who had just heard a particularly clever joke, and she added in a stage whisper that was clearly meant for me to hear, "I don't think those shoes have seen polish since the Stone Age. I mean, who even wears shoes like that to a bank? It's embarrassing." I felt something inside me crack, not break, but crack like ice on a frozen lake when the first warm day of spring arrives, and through that crack, something cold and determined began to flow into my veins, replacing the hot shame with something else, something focused and clear and absolutely committed to a single purpose. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, memorizing his face, the smug set of his jaw, the condescending tilt of his head, the expensive watch on his wrist that he was displaying so casually, so carelessly, because he had never known what it was like to not have enough, to want something so badly that you were willing to sacrifice everything for it. I looked at Jennifer, at her perfectly styled hair and designer clothing and mocking smile, and I made a promise to myself right then and there, a promise that would change my life, a promise that would consume me for years, a promise that I would keep no matter how long it took, no matter what I had to sacrifice. "I'll remember this," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me, despite the tears that I refused to let fall, despite the humiliation that threatened to crush me under its weight. "I'll remember this day, and I'll remember both of your names." Marcus laughed again, sharing a knowing look with Jennifer, as if I had just made a joke, as if the idea of me being anyone worth remembering, anyone capable of affecting their lives in any meaningful way, was absurd. "I'm sure you will," Marcus said dismissively, already turning away, already moving on to more important matters, already forgetting about me because people like me didn't matter to people like him. We were just background noise, just poor people who occasionally wandered into places where we didn't belong and needed to be reminded of our place. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual clients to attend to. Jennifer will show you the door." Jennifer stood up, still smiling that cruel smile, and gestured toward the exit with a sweeping motion of her arm, like a maitre d' dismissing an unwanted guest from an exclusive restaurant. "Have a nice day," she said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. So cold that I wondered how someone so young could already have lost so much humanity, could already have become so completely disconnected from empathy, from kindness, from the basic understanding that every person deserves respect regardless of what they wear or how much money they have. I walked out of that bank with my head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken, refusing to let them see the tears that were burning behind my eyes, threatening to spill down my cheeks and confirm their beliefs about me, about people like me, about anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of success and worthiness. The sunlight outside was harsh and bright, almost painful after the subdued lighting of the bank's interior, and I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, feeling that envelope of money in my pocket, $3,000 that suddenly felt like nothing, like play money, like a joke, because if it wasn't enough to earn me basic respect, basic human decency, then what was it worth? People walked past me on the busy downtown sidewalk, absorbed in their own lives, their own problems, completely unaware that they were passing someone whose entire world had just shifted on its axis, someone who had just experienced a transformation, a chrysalis moment where something new and determined and unstoppable was being born from the ashes of humiliation. I thought about giving up, about taking my money and forgetting about my dreams, about accepting my place in the world as someone who would always be judged by his appearance, always be found wanting, always be turned away from the places where success was created and maintained. But then I thought about Marcus's face, Jennifer's laughter, the casual cruelty with which they had dismissed me, treated me like I was worthless, like my dreams and my struggles and my sacrifices meant nothing, and that cold determination that had been flowing through my veins turned to ice, hard and unbreakable and sharp enough to cut through any obstacle. Have you ever felt that moment when humiliation transforms into fuel? When shame becomes the fire that drives you forward, instead of the weight that holds you back? That's what happened to me on that sidewalk outside First National Bank, and I want you to understand this because it's important. It's the key to everything that came after, everything I built, everything I became. I walked away from that bank, but I didn't walk away from my dreams. I walked toward them with a focus and intensity that I had never felt before, because now it wasn't just about success. It wasn't just about building a business and making money. It was about proving them wrong, about showing Marcus and Jennifer and everyone like them that they had made a terrible mistake, that their judgment was flawed, that their cruelty would come back to haunt them in ways they couldn't imagine. I went to a smaller bank across town, a community bank where the manager was an older black woman named Mrs. Patterson, who looked at my worn shoes and saw not poverty, but determination, who looked at my nervous hands and saw not inadequacy but potential, who listened to my business plan with genuine interest and enthusiasm instead of contempt and dismissal. She opened my account with a smile, a real smile that reached her eyes, and she told me something that I would never forget, words that would sustain me through the difficult years ahead, through the countless challenges and setbacks and moments when I wanted to give up. "Young man," she said, her voice warm and maternal, filled with the wisdom of someone who had seen struggle and overcome it, who understood what it meant to be underestimated and dismissed. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small because of what you wear or where you come from. Your worth isn't determined by your shoes, it's determined by what's in your heart and in your head. I've seen people in expensive suits with empty souls, and I've seen people in worn clothes with the kind of character and determination that moves mountains. You keep working hard, you keep believing in yourself, and you'll show all those people who doubted you exactly what you're made of." I left that bank with my account opened, my $3,000 safely deposited, and tears streaming down my face. But these were different tears, tears of gratitude, tears of relief, tears of renewed determination because Mrs. Patterson had reminded me that not everyone was like Marcus and Jennifer, that there were still good people in the world, people who saw beyond surfaces, people who understood that everyone starts somewhere and that everyone deserves a chance. Over the next 5 years, I worked harder than I had ever worked before, harder than I thought was humanly possible, pushing myself beyond every limit, beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, beyond doubt. My small tech consulting firm started slowly, just me in a tiny office that was really just a converted storage room in a building on the edge of downtown, working 20-hour days, living on coffee and determination, taking any client I could get, solving any problem they brought to me no matter how difficult or complex. I had a gift for understanding technology, for seeing patterns and solutions that others missed, for explaining complicated concepts in ways that made sense to people who weren't technical experts. And slowly, very slowly, my reputation began to grow. Word spread through the business community that there was this young consultant who could solve problems that others couldn't, who was reliable and honest and brilliant, and my client list grew from 1 or 2 small businesses to dozens, then hundreds. I hired my first employee after 2 years, a brilliant programmer named Sarah who had been rejected from every major tech company because she didn't have a degree from a prestigious university, only a community college certificate and raw talent that burned brighter than any Ivy League graduate I had ever met. I hired her because I saw in her what Mrs. Patterson had seen in me, potential that others had overlooked, determination that adversity had forged into something unbreakable, and a hunger to prove the doubters wrong. Together, we built something special, a company that valued talent over pedigree, results over appearances, character over credentials, and the universe rewarded us for it because we grew and grew and grew, adding employees, adding clients, adding revenue at a pace that shocked even me. By year 3, we had 50 employees. By year 4, 200, and by year 5, we were one of the most successful tech consulting firms in the region, with offices in 3 cities and annual revenue in the tens of millions. I never forgot where I came from, I never forgot those worn shoes, and I never forgot Marcus and Jennifer and First National Bank, because every time I closed a big deal, every time I landed a major client, every time I saw our quarterly revenue reports showing growth that most businesses could only dream of, I thought about that day, that humiliation, that laughter echoing through the marble lobby. I kept track of First National Bank, following their news, reading their annual reports, watching their stock price, learning everything I could about their operations, their leadership, their vulnerabilities, because that cold determination that had been born on the sidewalk outside their building had never left me, had never diminished, had only grown stronger as I grew stronger, as I became someone with resources, with power, with the ability to do something about the injustice I had experienced. I discovered that First National Bank was struggling, like many regional banks in the wake of various financial crises and changing regulations. Their stock price had been declining steadily for 3 years, their leadership was making questionable decisions, and there were rumors of internal problems, scandals involving loan practices, complaints about management. I started buying their stock quietly, using various investment vehicles and partnerships to avoid drawing attention, accumulating shares slowly over the course of 18 months, and I watched with satisfaction as my ownership percentage grew from 1% to 5% to 10% to 20%. The board of directors didn't know who was buying their stock, didn't know that the young man with worn shoes who had been laughed out of their lobby 5 years earlier was now their largest shareholder, positioning himself for a takeover that would shock the local business community and send ripples through the regional banking sector. I assembled a team of the best lawyers, the best financial advisors, the best strategists that money could buy, and we planned our approach with military precision, analyzing every detail, preparing for every contingency, making sure that when we made our move, it would be swift, decisive, and absolutely successful. The day came when I owned 45% of First National Bank stock, enough to demand board seats, enough to influence major decisions, enough to effectively control the bank even if I didn't technically own a majority yet, and I decided it was time to make myself known, time to step out of the shadows and remind certain people of a promise I had made 5 years earlier on a Tuesday morning when they had laughed at my shoes. I called a special board meeting, exercising my rights as a major shareholder, and I walked into that boardroom wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus probably made in a month, shoes that were handcrafted Italian leather, a watch that could have paid for Jennifer's entire wardrobe, but none of that mattered to me. None of those external symbols of success meant anything compared to what I was about to do, what I was about to accomplish. The board members were there, confused about who had called the meeting, confused about who this young shareholder was who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere with enough stock to command their attention. And when I walked in, when they saw my face, most of them showed no recognition because they had never seen me before, had never paid attention to the poor kid who had been mocked in their lobby 5 years earlier. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for two specific people. And when Marcus walked into that boardroom, when his eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of confusion, the slow dawning recognition, the gradual realization that something terrible was about to happen to him, I felt a satisfaction so profound that it was almost spiritual, almost transcendent, like every sacrifice, every 20-hour day, every moment of struggle had been leading to this single moment of vindication. "Good afternoon," I said calmly, my voice steady and professional, betraying none of the emotion that was churning inside me like a storm barely contained. "My name is Michael Chen, and I'm now the majority shareholder of First National Bank. I've called this meeting to discuss significant changes in our management structure." Marcus's face went pale, actually pale, the blood draining from his cheeks as the implications of my words sank in, as he remembered that day, that moment, that young man with worn shoes who had promised to remember, and he was realizing, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life, that actions have consequences, that cruelty leaves marks, that the people you step on while climbing the ladder might one day be waiting for you at the top. I presented my vision for the bank, a vision that emphasized community service, accessibility for all clients regardless of their economic status, fair treatment, ethical practices, and a corporate culture that valued people over profits, substance over appearances, character over credentials. The board members listened with varying degrees of enthusiasm and concern, some nodding in agreement, others looking worried about the changes I was proposing, but none of them could deny that my track record spoke for itself, that I had built a tremendously successful business from nothing, that my instincts and leadership had been proven in the marketplace. When it came time to vote on the new management structure, I made my move, proposing the immediate termination of several executives including Marcus Thompson, senior loan officer, whose history of discriminatory behavior and poor judgment had been thoroughly documented by the private investigators I had hired to examine the bank's practices over the past 6 months. The evidence was damning. Marcus had a pattern of denying loans to qualified minority applicants, of making inappropriate comments to clients, of creating a hostile work environment, of treating the bank's lobby like his personal kingdom where he could mock and humiliate anyone he deemed unworthy of his attention. The board had no choice but to agree to his termination, not just because I wanted it, but because keeping him would have exposed the bank to lawsuits, to regulatory action, to the kind of scandal that could destroy their reputation and their business. Marcus sat there in shock, unable to speak, unable to process what was happening, watching his career, his status, his sense of superiority crumble around him like a sandcastle hit by a wave, and I felt no joy in his suffering, only a cold sense of justice being served, only a quiet satisfaction that the universe had been rebalanced in some small way. After the meeting, I asked security to escort Marcus to his office to collect his personal belongings, and I followed at a distance, wanting to see his face one more time, wanting to make sure he understood exactly why this was happening, wanting to close this chapter of my life completely. At his office door, he turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not defiance, but something closer to shame, to regret, to the realization that he had made a terrible mistake all those years ago, that his casual cruelty had set in motion a chain of events that had led to his downfall. "I remember you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, all the arrogance gone, all the superiority stripped away, leaving just a man who was facing the consequences of his actions. "The shoes. I remember your shoes." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, not wanting to say something cruel, not wanting to become like him, not wanting my victory to be tainted by unnecessary vindictiveness. "I was wrong," he continued, and I could see that it cost him something to say those words, to admit his failure, to acknowledge his mistake. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong to treat you that way. I was wrong about a lot of things. I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between us, unexpected, genuine, and I realized that this moment wasn't about revenge. It had never really been about revenge. It had been about justice, about proving that people couldn't treat others with cruelty without consequence, about showing that appearances don't determine worth, that everyone deserves respect and dignity, regardless of what they wear or where they come from. "I accept your apology," I said finally, surprised by my own words, surprised that I meant them, surprised that the anger that had fueled me for so long was dissipating, being replaced by something else, something that felt like peace, like closure, like the end of a journey that had been necessary but painful. "But the termination stands, not because of what you did to me, but because of what you've done to countless other people over the years, people who didn't have the resources or the determination to fight back, people who just walked away carrying that humiliation with them. You need to learn that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, deserves fair treatment, deserves to be seen as a human being with dreams and struggles and dignity." Marcus nodded, tears actually forming in his eyes, and he walked away to collect his things, leaving me standing in the hallway of the bank that I now owned, the bank where I had once been mocked and humiliated, the bank that would now become something different, something better, something that reflected my values instead of the casual cruelty of people like Marcus. Jennifer was next, and when security brought her to my new office, the office that had previously belonged to the bank's CEO, who had also been replaced due to poor performance and questionable ethics, she walked in with that same defiant tilt to her chin, that same superiority in her eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe that anything truly bad could happen to her, as if her good looks and designer clothes were a shield that would protect her from consequences. "Do you remember me?" I asked, sitting behind my desk, the desk that represented power and authority in this institution that had once rejected me, and I watched her face carefully, watched for the moment of recognition, the instant when she would realize who I was and what was about to happen. She looked at me blankly for a moment, her perfectly made-up face showing no sign of recognition, and I realized with a mixture of disappointment and understanding that I had been forgettable to her, just one of many people she had mocked over the years, just another poor person who had wandered into her domain and needed to be reminded of their place. "Should I?" she asked, her voice still carrying that edge of superiority, that suggestion that I was wasting her time, that she had better things to do than stand in my office answering questions. I stood up and walked around the desk, and as I got closer, I saw her eyes widen slightly, saw the first hint of uncertainty creep into her expression, saw her taking in my expensive suit, my confident bearing, my position of power in this place where she had once been the gatekeeper, the one who decided who was worthy and who wasn't. "5 years ago," I said softly, "I walked into this bank wearing worn shoes. You laughed at me. You called Marcus over to laugh at me. You suggested I go to a check cashing place because I wasn't the right caliber of client for First National Bank." The color drained from her face as the memory surfaced, as she realized who I was and what this meant, as the full weight of her past actions crashed down on her like an avalanche, burying her assumptions about how the world worked, about how her beauty and her position protected her from consequences. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand coming up to cover her mouth, the same gesture she had used 5 years ago, except now it was expressing genuine shock instead of fake concern over my appearance. I was just," she trailed off, unable to find words that could explain away what she had done, unable to construct an excuse that would make her behavior acceptable, unable to escape the reality that she was facing someone she had wronged, someone who now had power over her future. "You were just following Marcus's lead," I finished for her, my voice calm, matter-of-fact, without the anger I had expected to feel in this moment. "You were just participating in the casual cruelty that was part of the culture here, the culture that said some people mattered and some people didn't, that appearances were more important than character, that it was acceptable, even entertaining, to mock and humiliate people who didn't meet your standards." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, real tears, and I saw that unlike Marcus's practiced emotional manipulation, these tears came from genuine fear, genuine regret, genuine understanding that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't control. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, all the superiority gone, all the mocking humor vanished, leaving just a young woman who was terrified of losing her job, her income, her sense of security in a world that she was realizing was much less forgiving than she had believed. Please, I need this job. I have student loans. I have rent. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. If you had known what? I interrupted, my voice sharp despite my intention to remain calm. If you had known that I would one day have power over you? If you had known that I would become successful? That's not the point, Jennifer. The point is that you should have treated me with respect, because I was a human being, not because of what I might become or what I might be able to do to you someday. Every person who walks through these doors deserves basic human dignity, regardless of their shoes, regardless of their clothes, regardless of their bank balance. She nodded miserably, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, and I felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and pity, justice and mercy, vindication and compassion. Your termination is effective immediately, I said, the words coming out more gently than I had planned, because I realized that I didn't want to be cruel, didn't want to become the thing I had hated, didn't want my moment of justice to be tainted by unnecessary harshness. You'll receive 2 months severance pay, which is more than generous considering your behavior, and I'd suggest you use this experience to think about how you treat people, about how everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about how a moment of cruelty can affect someone's life in ways you can't imagine. Jennifer left my office sobbing, escorted by security, and I watched her go with mixed feelings, wondering if she would learn from this experience, if she would become a better person, if my actions had accomplished anything beyond satisfying my desire for justice. The bank underwent massive changes in the months that followed, changes that transformed it from a cold, elitist institution that served only the wealthy into a community bank that actually cared about people, that saw every client as valuable, that measured success not just in profits but in lives improved, in dreams funded, in opportunities created. I hired Mrs. Patterson as our chief lending officer, bringing her expertise and compassion to an institution that desperately needed both, and together we restructured our loan programs to give chances to people who had been overlooked by traditional banking, people with worn shoes and big dreams, people who reminded me of myself 5 years earlier. We created a program specifically designed to help small business owners get started, offering microloans with reasonable terms, providing mentorship and support, creating a pathway to success for people who had been told they weren't good enough, weren't the right caliber, weren't worthy of investment. The program was phenomenally successful, with a repayment rate that exceeded our projections and a track record of creating thriving businesses that enriched the community, creating jobs, generating tax revenue, transforming neighborhoods. I made sure that everyone who worked at the bank understood our new culture, our new values, our commitment to treating every human being with respect and dignity, and I personally interviewed every employee to make sure they shared those values, to make sure that what happened to me would never happen to anyone else, to make sure that our lobby would be a place of welcome and possibility rather than judgment and rejection. 3 years after taking over the bank, I was reviewing loan applications in my office when my assistant informed me that someone was asking to see me, someone without an appointment who claimed it was important, someone who was wearing worn shoes and looked nervous standing in our lobby. I smiled and told my assistant to send them up immediately, and when a young Hispanic woman entered my office, clutching an envelope and looking around at the expensive furnishings with the same mixture of hope and fear that I remembered feeling all those years ago, I stood up and offered her my hand, making sure she saw my genuine smile, making sure she felt welcome, making sure she understood that she belonged here as much as anyone. "Please sit down," I said warmly, gesturing to the comfortable chair across from my desk. "How can I help you today?" She sat cautiously, perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment, and she pulled out papers from her envelope with hands that trembled slightly, and I saw in her everything I had been, all the hope and fear and determination and vulnerability that comes with trying to build something from nothing. "I want to start a business," she said, her voice quiet but steady, her eyes meeting mine with a directness that told me she had practiced this moment, had prepared for this conversation, had built up her courage to walk through our doors despite probably being turned away from other banks, despite probably being told she wasn't qualified, wasn't ready, wasn't the right type of person. "I have a plan. I have some savings. I have experience in catering and I know I can make this work, but I need a small loan to get started, to buy equipment and supplies, to rent a commercial kitchen space." I listened to her pitch, to her dreams, to her carefully prepared business plan that showed hours of research and thought and preparation. and I saw the passion in her eyes, the hunger for success, the determination that couldn't be taught or bought or borrowed. She had $2,500 in savings, almost nothing by banking standards, but everything by the standards of someone who had worked multiple jobs and sacrificed every luxury to accumulate that money. And she was asking for a $10,000 loan, a small amount that could change her life. That could be the difference between spending the next decade working for minimum wage in other people's restaurants and building her own business, her own future, her own version of success. "I'll be honest with you," I said when she finished her presentation, and I saw her face fall slightly, bracing for rejection, bracing for the words that had probably been said to her before by other bankers, by other gatekeepers who couldn't see beyond her worn shoes and modest savings to the potential underneath. "I've heard a lot of business pitches in my career, and yours is one of the best I've seen. Your research is thorough. Your financial projections are realistic. Your understanding of your market is excellent. And most importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have hunger. You have the determination to succeed, no matter what obstacles you face, and that's worth more than any amount of money." Her eyes widened, hope replacing the resignation, and I continued. "I'm going to approve your loan, and I'm going to give you $15,000 instead of $10,000, because I think you're underestimating what you'll need to get started, and I'd rather you have a cushion for unexpected expenses than be scrambling for funds when your equipment breaks down, or you need to hire temporary help during your busy season." Tears streamed down her face, and she couldn't speak, could only nod, could only sit there crying tears of relief and gratitude and disbelief that someone was actually saying yes, actually believing in her, actually giving her a chance. "There's one condition," I said, and I saw her tense slightly, waiting for the catch, waiting for the requirement that would make this opportunity impossible. "When you're successful, when your business is thriving and you're making good money, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what it felt like to be given a chance, to be believed in, to be treated with respect and dignity even when you were at your most vulnerable. And I want you to pay it forward, to give someone else a chance, to be the person who sees potential in people that others overlook, to never, never judge someone by their shoes or their clothes or their bank balance." She nodded vigorously, understanding, accepting this responsibility, accepting this legacy of kindness and opportunity that I was trying to create. "I promise," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll never forget this, and I'll help other people the way you're helping me." I approved her loan that day, and I've followed her business's progress over the years, watching with pride as her catering company grew from a one-woman operation to a thriving business with 15 employees, watching as she bought her own commercial kitchen, watching as she started offering jobs and opportunities to other people who reminded her of herself, other people with worn shoes and big dreams. She's one of dozens of similar stories, dozens of people who came through our doors over the past few years, people who were given chances they had been denied elsewhere, people who took those chances and built something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that talent and determination and character matter more than appearances, more than credentials, more than all the superficial markers that our society uses to decide who deserves opportunities and who doesn't. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, as I reflect on everything that happened, everything I learned, everything I became, I want you to understand something important, something that goes beyond my personal journey of humiliation and vindication. This story isn't really about revenge, although that's how it might seem on the surface. It's about justice. It's about the fact that how we treat people matters. It matters more than we realize in the moment. It matters in ways that ripple out through time and affect lives in unexpected ways. When Marcus and Jennifer laughed at my shoes, they weren't just being casually cruel. They were participating in a system that decides people's worth based on appearances, a system that denies opportunities to people who don't fit certain molds, a system that perpetuates inequality and injustice under the guise of professionalism and standards. I could have let that moment destroy me. I could have accepted their judgment. I could have internalized their contempt and believed that they were right, that I wasn't good enough, that I should stay in my place and not reach for dreams that were above my station. But instead, I used that moment as fuel, as motivation, as proof that the system was broken and needed to be changed, and I spent years building the power and resources necessary to make that change, to transform at least one institution from a place of judgment and rejection into a place of opportunity and hope. The satisfaction I felt when I fired Marcus and Jennifer wasn't really about punishing them, although I won't lie and say there wasn't some satisfaction in seeing them face consequences for their actions. It was about creating a world where what happened to me wouldn't happen to others, where people would be judged by their character and their potential, rather than their appearance and their current circumstances. Every single day I walk through the lobby of First National Bank, the lobby where I was once humiliated, and I see people from all walks of life being treated with respect and dignity, being given chances, being believed in, and that brings me more satisfaction than any amount of personal revenge ever could. I see single mothers opening their first savings accounts. I see immigrants starting small businesses. I see young people who remind me of myself being given loans that will change their lives, and I know that the humiliation I experienced, the pain I felt, the anger that drove me, it all had a purpose. It all led to something bigger than myself, something that will continue long after I'm gone. The bank is profitable, more profitable than it was under the old management, because it turns out that treating people well, investing in communities, and believing in human potential is actually good business. Not just morally right, but financially sound, and that's a lesson that more institutions need to learn. I still have those old shoes, the shoes that Marcus and Jennifer laughed at. I keep them in a display case in my office as a reminder of where I came from, as a reminder of why I do what I do, as a reminder that appearances are deceiving and that every person deserves a chance regardless of what they're wearing. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working in my office, I take those shoes out of their case and hold them, feeling the worn leather, the holes in the soles, the frayed laces, and I remember that young man who walked into this bank with hope and dreams and $3,000 that represented everything he had worked for, and I remember the pain of being judged, being mocked, being dismissed as unworthy. But I also remember the determination that was born from that pain, the commitment to prove them wrong, the dedication to building something better, and I realized that in a strange way, Marcus and Jennifer gave me a gift that day. They gave me the motivation to become someone who could change things, someone who could make a difference, someone who could create opportunities for others who faced the same barriers I faced. If they had treated me kindly that day, if they had opened my account with professionalism and respect, would I have been satisfied with my small business? Would I have pushed myself to grow, to expand, to accumulate the resources necessary to buy a bank? Maybe not. Maybe I would have been content with modest success, with a comfortable life, with achieving my small dreams without reaching for something bigger. Their cruelty pushed me to greatness in a way that kindness might not have, and while I'm not grateful for the pain they caused, I'm grateful for what I became because of it, grateful for the strength I discovered in myself, grateful for the opportunity to create change in the world. I've seen Marcus a few times over the years, usually at banking conferences or community events, and he's changed, he's humbled. He's working for a smaller institution now in a less prestigious position, and I've heard from mutual acquaintances that he's become known for his fairness, for his willingness to give people chances, for his understanding that everyone deserves respect. I'd like to think that being fired, facing consequences for his behavior, being forced to confront his own cruelty, changed him into a better person. And if that's true, then maybe my actions did more than just satisfy my desire for justice. Maybe they helped reform someone who might have otherwise spent his entire career treating people poorly, denying opportunities, perpetuating injustice. Jennifer, I've heard, left banking entirely. She went back to school and became a social worker, working with disadvantaged youth, helping teenagers who face discrimination and barriers, using her experience to ensure that others don't have to go through what she put others through. I don't know if this career change was motivated by genuine remorse or by necessity after being fired from a prestigious bank, but either way, it seems like she's found a path where she's helping rather than hurting, where she's building up rather than tearing down, and that's something positive that came from a painful situation. Mrs. Patterson retired last year at the age of 70, after helping me transform First National Bank into an institution that reflects our shared values. And at her retirement party, surrounded by dozens of successful business owners who had been given their first loans by her, who had been believed in by her when others had dismissed them, she pulled me aside and told me something that I'll treasure forever. "Michael," she said, her wise old eyes looking into mine with the same kindness she had shown me all those years ago when I was just a young man with worn shoes and a dream. "I've seen a lot in my decades in banking. I've seen how money can corrupt people, how power can make them forget where they came from, how success can make them cruel to those who are struggling. But you never forgot, you never let your success change who you are at your core. You never lost that empathy that comes from having struggled, from having been dismissed and underestimated and treated poorly. You took your pain and transformed it into something beautiful, something that helps others, something that makes the world a little bit better. And that's the mark of true character. I'm proud of you. Not because you became successful, not because you bought a bank, but because you became someone who uses his power to lift others up rather than push them down. Those words meant more to me than any profit report, more than any award or recognition, more than the satisfaction of having proven Marcus and Jennifer wrong, because Mrs. Patterson understood what this journey had really been about. She understood that it wasn't about revenge or vindication or even justice. It was about transformation, about taking the worst moment of my life and using it to create something meaningful, about ensuring that others wouldn't have to experience what I experienced, about building a legacy of kindness and opportunity that would outlast me. So now I'm asking you, whoever you are watching this video, whoever is listening to my story, have you ever been judged unfairly? Have you ever been dismissed because of how you look, where you come from, what you're wearing? Have you ever been laughed at, mocked, humiliated by people who thought they were better than you, who thought your dreams were jokes, who thought you weren't worthy of basic respect and dignity? If you have, I want you to know that you're not alone, that millions of people face this kind of treatment every single day, that the world is full of gatekeepers who think they have the right to decide who deserves opportunities and who doesn't, based on superficial factors that have nothing to do with character or potential or determination. But I also want you to know that you have a choice in how you respond to that treatment. You can let it destroy you. Let it convince you that the harsh judgment of others is accurate. Let it stop you from pursuing your dreams. Or you can use it as fuel, as motivation, as proof that you need to work even harder, push even further, become even stronger so that someday you can prove them wrong, and more importantly, so that someday you can create change that prevents others from facing the same barriers you faced. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams are impossible. Don't let anyone's laughter or contempt or dismissal stop you from becoming everything you're capable of becoming. The people who judge you based on your appearance, who mock your struggles, who dismiss your potential, they're revealing their own limitations, their own lack of character, their own inability to see beneath the surface, and their judgment says nothing about your worth, nothing about your potential, nothing about your future. Take that anger, that humiliation, that pain that comes from being treated poorly, and transform it into something powerful, something that drives you forward rather than holding you back, something that makes you stronger rather than weaker. Use it to build something, to achieve something, to become someone who makes a difference in the world, someone who treats others with the kindness and respect that you were denied, someone who creates opportunities rather than closing doors. Now I want to hear from you. I want to know your story. Have you ever faced discrimination or judgment based on your appearance? Have you ever been underestimated or dismissed by people who thought they were better than you? How did you respond? What did you do with that experience? Share your story in the comments below because every story matters, every experience of injustice is significant. And by sharing our stories, we create a community of people who understand, who support each other, who refuse to let the judgment of others define our worth or limit our potential. And if this story resonated with you, if you understand what it's like to be judged unfairly, if you believe that everyone deserves respect and opportunity regardless of their circumstances, then please hit that like button, because it helps this message reach more people who need to hear that they're not alone, more people who need to understand that their current circumstances don't determine their future, more people who need the motivation to keep pushing forward despite the obstacles and the doubters and the people who laugh at their shoes. Subscribe to Through My Eyes for more stories like this. Stories of transformation, stories of overcoming adversity, stories of people who refused to let others define their worth, who took their pain and used it to create something beautiful, who proved that character and determination matter more than appearances or credentials, or all the superficial ways our society judges people. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Because every week we share new experiences, new journeys, new examples of what's possible when you refuse to give up, when you refuse to accept other people's limitations, when you refuse to be anything less than everything you're capable of becoming. Remember, your worth isn't determined by your shoes, by your clothes, by your current bank balance, by what others think of you or how they treat you. Your worth is inherent. It's based on who you are as a person, on your character, on your determination, on your dreams. And no one has the right to take that away from you or make you feel less than you are. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community where we celebrate perseverance, where we support each other's dreams, where we refuse to let the cruelty of others stop us from becoming everything we're meant to be. Your story matters. Your dreams matter. You matter. And don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise.